Evening. You're not allowed to hide at the back. Seriously, come forward because I want to talk to everyone. There's lots during this talk where we're just waiting for things. So I'm probably going to be asking questions and you can ask questions. Feel free to interrupt as well. Like, don't have to wait to the end. So let's get started. Hopefully you're all here for the PHP user group. If not, leave now. And you're here to learn about Vagrant and Ansible. I'm Michael, Heap on Twitter, and I'm a developer at DataSift in Reading. At DataSift, we process high volumes of real-time information, things like the Twitter firehose, Tumblr firehose, Bitly firehose. We recently got access to Sina Weibo, which is the biggest social network in China. All kinds of interesting stuff. We're hiring, of course. If you want to know more about the company, whether you want to come and work for us or not later, just give me a shout. How many of you have used Vagrant before? Just one. How many of you have ever heard of Vagrant before? About half. What about Ansible? No? Cool. What about Puppet and Chef? Puppet? Chef. Okay. Before we get into that, I'm Michael, I'm Heap on Twitter, and I'm a developer at DataSift again. And we're going to talk about Vagrant and Ansible. Vagrant has the tagline, development environments made easy. What Vagrant does is it provides a reproducible way to create virtual machines. It started out as a VirtualBox plugin, but now there's plugins for Amazon AWS, OpenStack, all kinds of things. Your virtual machine is defined in a config file, which means that every time you run Vagrant up, you get the same machine. And Ansible is built as radically simple IT orchestration. Ansible is used to install software and configs onto the virtual machines or the physical hardware once you've got them. So why do we need them? Like, a lot of you have never used Vagrant before. You seem to be coping well. But how can Vagrant and Ansible make your life easier? How many times have you heard this? Works on my box. To which the great reply, okay, back up your email, we're putting your laptop into production. What about the server disk died? It's a bit worse. Like, how can we get our production infrastructure back up and running as quickly as possible? And that's what all this is about, really. It's about reproduction. It's about the ability to quickly reproduce an environment. It doesn't matter if your entire data center gets set on fire. Within a couple of hours, providing you have the hardware, you can have everything up and running again as intended. More minions. You missed the beginning.
Sorry. You never know about that magic unicorn.
It is a pretty amazing magical unicorn.
Oh, awkward. Sorry.
How many of you guys have ever used Vagrant?
Yeah.
Yeah? Vagrant?
Yeah.
Yep. Ansible?
No.
No. Chef? Puppet? Puppet?
No.
No? Okay. That's basically what you missed. And why do we use them? To make things reproducible. You'll be glad to hear that you arrived for the really fun part, because this is a pretty dry topic. So we're going to build something. I'm not going to sit down yet though, because there's more slides. First, we need to get a machine. And this is where Vagrant comes in. First, you'll need to install Vagrant. You'll need VirtualBox as well. That's the default driver for it. You can get Vagrant and VirtualBox for Windows, Mac, and Linux. So it doesn't matter what OS you use. And once you've got all that installed, the first thing that you need to do is get a box to run inside it. A box is just a virtual machine image along with some metadata. There are official boxes available. at vagrantbox.es. There's things like Precise64, which is an Ubuntu VM. There's loads of CentOS ones, some community contributed ones, some that already have Puppet running on them, so you don't have to install it yourself. There's all kinds there. So once you've got this box, you need to register it with with Vagrant. You do that with Vagrant box add name and optionally URL. If the named box doesn't exist on your system, it will run off the URL, download it and cache it for next time. The next thing you want to do is initialize a project to use that box. So here we create a directory called Vagrant example, cd into it, and type Vagrant init name. What that'll do is it'll generate a Vagrant file, which is the config file that shows how the machine should be put together. They're quite long, but the general gist of it is it looks something like this. It starts off with the name of the box that you're building. In this case, I'm using a Precise64 box. I'm giving it a private network IP on my local network so I can get to it and other people can get to it as well. And I'm customizing it because by default they come with 256 megs of RAM. I'd rather mine had a gig. Once you've got this file, you just type Vagrant up. This will boot up your machine. If it already exists, it'll just boot it. If it doesn't, it'll import your base box, make a copy of it, and then boot it up. Then you can Vagrant SSH into it. This will log you into the VM, but it's worth noting that this uses insecure keys. This uses the same public and private key pair that every Vagrant install out there uses. So if you want some form of security, make sure to change them. When you're done working, Vagrant halt. This stops the virtual machine and frees up any RAM that it's using, anything like that. And finally, Vagrant destroy, which will completely free up resources, hard drive space, everything. But any changes that you made are now gone. Next time you type Vagrant up, it'll import your base box again and it'll be empty. So if you're still working on things, Vagrant halt. If you're done working on things, Vagrant destroy. And that's Vagrant in a nutshell. But now what? We have a machine, but it doesn't actually do anything. Every time you type Vagrant destroy, it's gone. It needs provisioning, and that's where Ansible comes in. So, what is Ansible? What does it actually do? It's billed as radically simple IT orchestration, but that just sounds like marketing speak to me. This is the part where it's just really boring to explain, so instead we're going to build something. We're going to build a VirtualBox image, provision it with Ansible, and by the end of the talk it'll install Apache, PHP, MySQL and Git, configure a virtual host, clone the site from GitHub, and we should be able to visit in Chrome, fingers crossed. So, let's see how this goes. So, this is my Vagrant file. Like I said, it's much longer. This is all automatically generated, but we don't care about any of that really. Yes, it is a Ruby file. We just want to type Vagrant up, and what that'll do is it'll import the base box, boot it up, and take a minute or two, so we'll just leave it for now to run in the background. Ansible uses YAML files to define what's going on. They have a very consistent structure. They can be as messy or as clean as you want. But they all start with something that looks like this. So I just realised I'm sat right in front of you. we start off with hosts, which is where should we run this? So I'm saying run it on all the machines, and I'll show you how that's detected in a minute. We're going to run all of these with sudo, set up a couple of variables that we're going to use whilst provisioning. And the first task is just to make sure that we can connect to the box. Because if we can't connect, we can't do anything. So I'm just saying, let's ping the box. And we're still waiting for the VM to boot. Any questions so far? You guys are rubbish.
Is it something you're using in your organisation?
Yes, that's actually how I became interested in it. We use it in the QA department. So we have a lot of services that just take data in and pump data out. So we can spin up a virtual machine, deploy the software, pump data through it, monitor, and tear it all down in an automated fashion. And we're still waiting. Come on, another question.
What's the benefits of using Ansible over something like Chef or Puppet?
The barrier to entry is much, much lower.
Right.
I couldn't sit and build this with Puppet or Chef in the 15 minutes that it's going to take now.
Sure.
In fact, what I showed you here is about 50% of the playbook.
Right, okay.
What is it underneath? Python?
Yes, Ansible is Python underneath.
So if you want to do anything that's not sort of out of the box, then you need to start getting down to Python. So.
No, the modules, so long as the modules output JSON, it doesn't matter what the module's written in.
Okay.
So Ansible will feed in JSON, read out JSON, but everything in between is up to you.
Write it in whatever language.
Yep. Didn't take this long earlier. Come on, another question. I'm going to put you on the spot.
What are you using to actually deploy to production?
Chef. Yeah. This was a project by the developers to try and create reproducible environments themselves without having to go to our ops team. Ansible's got a lot better since we started using it for wide-scale network, wide-scale production deployments. But we don't trust it enough because we know Chef, we know it can handle our workload. And what is going on? I'm just going to kill it. And try again because it shouldn't be taking this long. Although my little MacBook Air is getting on a bit now. So that might be it.
For this example, are all the VMs running locally on your Mac?
Yep. Yeah, that's what it's doing now. It's importing the image and spinning it up in a headless VirtualBox instance. If I launch VirtualBox, there you can see it running. It's a shame because last time I did this, it went flawlessly, which just set expectations.
It's shine.
Yeah. So, for those of you that have never used Vagrant before, do you know why you'd use it in the future? Or else is it still not looking too useful? Like, at the minute, it's just an empty box.
The first thing is collaboration. Obviously, everyone can use the same environment, just with downloading the file and then typing Vagrant out.
Yep. So, your software, you've got a team of crack developers that write everything on Linux. You get your front-end guys running on Macs. Your software doesn't run. It's fine. Give them a Vagrant image, they type Vagrant up. They're still on the Mac, but everything's working.
Have you tried using any of the other providers with Vagrant? So the Parallels one or the what's the other?
VMware.
One? Yeah.
I haven't because you've got to pay for the VMware one.
Yeah, it's quite expensive.
So that's really good though. Like, wicked fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we do all of our stuff with VirtualBox.
I think your box is dead.
I think it is. It's a shame because literally an hour ago I ran through this and it worked.
It normally spits out info, doesn't it? Like what it's doing.
Trevor's stuck on Ruby.
That says something about 384 meg base memory. What the hell is going on?
Yeah, that's the default. I didn't set it to a gig in this generated file. Tell you what, I'm just going to carry on and we can come back. So let's just assume that we can talk to the box. The next thing that we want to do is install Apache. So we give it a title. We say with the apt module, make sure that Apache 2 is installed. And when I run this playbook against the VM, it will make sure that Apache is installed. We could do a few more. PHP, MySQL, Git, all the kinds of things that we need.
Is it looking at like modules to install those? Or does it
Yes.
know what those are? Is it, where are the modules kept?
So these modules are built in, apt and ping. Those are they just get shipped with Ansible.
Sure. What about like MySQL server?
So that is the apt package name that it's looking to install.
Oh, so it's just doing it through.
Yeah, it's just doing. Yeah, it's the same as you type in sudo apt get install MySQL server.
If you wanted to install something outside of apt, how is that?
There is a shell command which will just run whatever you give it, but it's generally not advised to use that. It's a really quick win if you've got existing shell scripts to just copy and paste them into playbooks and then replace the tasks one by one with the modules. But the thing with shell scripts is they run every time. With this, it will detect using apt that once it's run once, things are already installed and won't try and reinstall them again.
At what point does this run? Is it something on when the VM boots up? Or is it something you have to run automatically manually?
You can do either.
Right.
I like running it by hand as you get more debug output, but there is a Vagrant provisioner that you just point to your playbook, and every time you type Vagrant up, it will run.
Sure. Okay.
What about installing like MySQL or kind of adding MySQL users?
Yep, there's modules for all the administration side of it.
What about if you want custom, well obviously you would do like PHP INI.
Yeah, importing templates.
Okay, so let's do that bit now. I'll run through this again if the box ever comes to life. So the next item on the list, once we've installed all our packages, is to create a vhost. So same as PHP.ini, it's just a file that gets copied into etc Apache 2 sites enabled. And here we're using the template module. We're using the template module. I'm saying look in templates demo and copy it to sites enabled. And templates demo is currently empty. But our virtual host is going to look something like this. Notice, hey, it worked this time. I'm going to undo all this because it's actually much more fun if you can see it happening. Okay, so I'm on the box. Nothing's showing up, nothing's installed. So the first thing that we want to do is make sure that we can connect. You asked earlier how you run it. This is how I like to run it. using Ansible playbook. The I is a path to an inventory file, and the parameter is the YAML file to run.
What's the difference between running that and just Vagrant provision?
Vagrant provision will run all of this and capture all the output internally,
Sure.
whereas this will show you what's happening
That's just using Ansible.
directly.
Right.
You can run this command against a physical server somewhere, and it'll run exactly the same.
Sorry, what's an inventory file?
So this is an inventory file, IP address, and then a couple of options to say log in as this user with this key file. I'll come back to some more complicated ones of these in a bit. So if we run this, gathering facts, yep, fine. Hey, we can connect, everything was fine. So let's actually install Apache this time. Save it, and we run it again. Where I give every task a name, you don't actually have to. You can just add line after line after line of tasks to run, and the task that's being run will be put as the title. I like giving them names, as it makes things much easier to debug when things go wrong, and things will go wrong. So now it says we've installed Apache. It changed, like something, the state of the system changed. There it is. If we run that again, it should detect that Apache's already there and say, okay, fine, we didn't change anything this time.
Can you change the config and it will update, like vhosts, or can you change the template files you're using that will automatically detect that and update them?
No, so this is literally just installing Apache, nothing to do with template files, anything like that. I'll just install the other packages and then we'll come back to the template because it can detect changes. So I'll install PHP, MySQL Server and Git. And that's running. So what you were just asking, this notify block here, notifies a run right at the end of the playbook. So you can say notify this, notify that, anywhere that you want. And at the end,
So it all happens sequentially in order that it's defined in, is that?
yeah. And what this notify block is it just looks for a handler named the same. And I've said, when you see restart Apache, make sure that the service Apache 2 is restarted. So if you do multiple notify Apaches throughout your playbook, it'll still only restart once right at the end.
Can you tag one to another? Say you want to install like a Git package, or sorry, a Git repository. Can you make it wait till after you've installed Git, or because you've got it?
Yeah, it runs sequentially. Yeah, it's unlike other provisioning software like that. Others have the eventually consistent model, where you just define dependencies and it does things whenever it can. Ansible will do A, then B, then C, then D, which makes it much easier to get your head around when you're new to things like this. So, we're back to where we got to, the template. So what this is saying is take the template located at templates demo and copy it to etc Apache 2 sites enabled. As we can see, there's nothing in there at the minute. And I was explaining this. So this bit here, domain. Some of you might not have seen this before. It's internally Ansible uses something called the Ginger2 templating library, and anytime you use the template module, any variables in there, this is a variable, get swapped out. So in this case, it's going to get swapped out for this. So let's give that a run. Hopefully it should just skip all the install tasks. Yep, everything's already installed. So we created the vhost and we notified Apache and it restarted. If we take a look at our VM, it's there. And our domain variable has been swapped out. The only other thing left to do, actually, I've run it again. So this will copy the template file in there again, like it'll swap it out. But notice how it says OK this time, because it detected that nothing changed. And then Apache wasn't restarted, because nothing changed. Notifies only happen when there's something to do. And finally, let's clone the repo. Really simple site that I put together from GitHub, stick it in void www demo.
Why do they use that like weird named parameter syntax in the YAML file rather than just using like normal YAML? Is there any kind of reason?
This is normal YAML.
Is it? I thought you had to like drop onto another line. So where you've got repo equals, and that'll just be passed as like a string by.
Oh, that.
Yeah.
That's actually a handover from the original tool, which was just command line driven.
Right.
Okay. I actually quite like it. I'd never considered it before.
Yeah.
It's just like named parameters
Yeah, sure.
in any other language. So, clone the repo. My site exists and it works. And
It wasn't certain, was it?
it's always nice when things work.
But we appreciate it more because of the danger.
How boring would that have been if I just stood there saying, this is a config file, this is a Git module. And I'll just leave that running. And at the end, I'll run through the playbook again, all as one. And you can see just how quickly things can be provisioned. Which means I get to go back to nice, safe Keynote land, where nothing can go wrong. So, hopefully now you want to try Ansible. You need to get it installed. As mentioned earlier, it is written in Python, so you can install it from pip, or if you prefer it's in apt and yum. If you're using Mac, it's in homebrew. If you're on Windows, you're on your own. Only because I've never used it. Like Python runs fantastically well on Windows as well. Inventory files. You need to tell Ansible what machines to run on. We took a quick look at one earlier. Here's a slightly more complicated one. Here we have 4 servers. If I said hosts all, the playbook would run against all 4 of these. But alternatively, I could have said hosts web, hosts load balancers, host DB to run against a subset of them. They're in INI format, so these are actually section headings. And under each one is the servers that you want to run it against. Inventory files are really nice because you can do things like have a development one. These are all virtual machines somewhere. You've got a load balancer going between your 2 little web virtual machines. You've got a database server somewhere. But this is your production one. You've got 10 web servers. You didn't even have to type them all out. You just can use expansion. So web1 to web10.example.com. This time you've got 2 load balancers and still 1 database server. To Ansible, it doesn't matter how many servers you've got in which group. Your playbooks run against all of them. I think the default setting for it is 5, but Ansible will run in parallel against multiple hosts, so you can get through them pretty quickly. There's a couple of special options in the inventory files. They all start with Ansible underscore. The first one is Ansible underscore connection. I use SSH for a lot of them. There's some crazy ones, like there's a 0MQ one, where you literally open the connection, just fire messages down and hope they succeed. There's Paramiko, which is a Python implementation of the SSH protocol. And there's local, which is, I'm just going to run this on my local box. So I don't even worry about trying to SSH into it, because I'm already there. And then there's Ansible SSH user. By default, I think it will try and SSH in as Ansible, but you can give it any username to try and log in as. You can set usernames, password keys, all kinds of things in here. The documentation is really good. And this is the one that I just used, except this bit. So I've got a web server at this IP. I'm going to log in as Vagrant, and the path to my private key file is this. And that's what allowed Ansible to log into my Vagrant VM without me doing any additional configuration. It's just the same as if you typed SSH at the command line and passed these options. Once you've told Ansible where to run, we need to tell it what to run, and that's where the playbooks come in. They're just YAML files. We just put one together. In fact, we just put together this one. I've dropped a couple of the packages out to make it fit on the slide. But quick run through. I did this because things weren't working, but let's just do it again. By default, we run on all hosts and we run everything as sudo. You don't have to have this here. You can put this down here at this level. You can run individual tasks as sudo or none at all. In this case, I've put it at the top because I'm installing system packages and copying to privileged locations. So it made sense to have it at playbook level rather than task level. I ran it against all, but we could run it against web or DB or whatever group of servers you want from the inventory file. The first thing that we did was install Apache. You do node tasks using this little tasks header, and every entry in there should have a name, and then has a name of a module and any parameters that are required by that module. We also use the template module. There's a file module which just copies files straight across, no variable substitution of anything. But the speed difference is negligible, so I always tend to use template because it means you get to use nice things like this. And finally we add the handler to say restart Apache, and when restart Apache is triggered we make sure that Apache 2 is restarted. So pretty straightforward. And we had to get the site on there somehow, so git, give it a repo and a destination, and it'll take care of cloning it down for you. Now whilst that playbook works, it's not very maintainable. Like imagine that you want to install a couple of different packages, set up some more config files, you're on php.ini, it's going to get very cluttered very fast. Imagine that you want to configure your database server as well. There's all kinds of things that you want to do. And whilst that works for a very quick hacky thing, it doesn't really work if you want them to be maintainable. Fortunately, Ansible has the concept of roles. So you can define roles like web, database, that install your packages and config files, and then you can apply them to any box that you want. You could have one box that has 10 roles applied. It could be web, database, backup, whatever you want. or you could have 10 different boxes, one role applied to each. So you have a very clear separation of concerns in the playbooks themselves. But when it comes to runtime, it doesn't matter where they're going. All Ansible will do is it'll run it against what you tell it to run. Recently, they launched Ansible Galaxy, which is a repository of user-contributed roles. They are user-contributed, so quality might be questionable. I actually checked with a colleague of mine who's used it, and he said that the quality is most definitely questionable. So mileage may vary there. I've not actually taken a look at it myself. I was just reading through the slides this morning and thought, I wonder if anything new's come out since I last gave this talk. And Ansible Galaxy was it. It's pretty useful though to be able to say, I want to install Redis, pull down the Redis role, here's the port number that I want to install it on, off you go. The Redis one's actually quite nice. I had a look at that just to see how they're formatted. So if you're looking for inspiration, there's a whole site out there of roles that you might want to fork, contribute back to, reuse, or you might just want to write all your own.
Are roles like collections of modules, or what?
A role is a collection of playbooks, templates, and optionally modules. You can bundle your own custom modules, yeah. But it's a self-defined, self-contained unit of work. So like in the playbook that we put together, we'd have a web role which installs Apache and PHP and does the template. We'd have a DB role that installs MySQL Server, might configure that as well. We'd have another role which is deploy sites, which will run the git clone, and then we just apply them all to the same box. Ansible also has the concept of tags. You can tag sections of playbooks and just run those sections on demand. So like the playbook that we put together is pretty small. I could run it every time and it didn't take too long. But imagine you've got 20 roles applied to a box and you update the config files. You don't want to go through and make sure that every package is installed. So what you can do is tag all the template lines with config, and then you do Ansible playbook, inventory file playbook, -- tag equals config, and it will only run the items in the playbooks that are tagged with config. That's very, very useful when you're developing these playbooks. It saves a lot of time. It also has parameterized includes. Imagine that you've got a WordPress playbook that installs WordPress, but you want different database passwords for them all. Instead of having 10 different playbooks, you can just apply the role to each server. And when you apply it to the server, you can pass in any variables that you want. So you do like include WordPress.yaml, comma, var A equals 1, var 2 equals B. You can have multiple of these lines, each with different variables, and they'll just get swapped straight into the playbooks as they run. Makes it very useful for deploying a large number of very similar things with slightly different configurations. It's got conditional actions. You might have noticed the gathering facts step, which I skipped over. My boxes don't have any facts really. They have the basic ones like I'm a Debian machine, I'm a Red Hat machine, things like that. We use this a lot. We've got a mix of, in the office, Ubuntu, Debian, Linux Mint, Fedora Core 15 to whatever the latest one is, CentOS 5, CentOS 6, and we want these playbooks to run on all of them. So just little things like on CentOS 5, running NTP to set the date uses a different path to running it on CentOS 6. So you can add another condition to each task that says when. And you can say when, I think it's ansible.os.release equals 5. Those variables are populated using either factor, which you might be familiar with if you've used Chef before, or hi, which is another facts gathering tool. It supports rolling deploys. you can set the maximum number of nodes to run on and the maximum failure percentage. So I mentioned earlier that you can run in 5 nodes in parallel. Imagine you've got 100 servers and you want to deploy to them all. You can set a maximum failure percentage so that when more than 5% of them fail to update, you cancel the deployment automatically. You don't need to take the entire cluster down for one bad deploy. I'd be here all day if I tried to list every single feature that Ansible has. It's under rapid development as well. The next release, 1.5, is out in March, which adds a lot of new goodies as well. The last release was in November, so that's what, 3 times a year they get a minor version bump. Minor, not patch. Minor version bump, and that normally adds loads of new modules and commands and things like Galaxy. But Ansible can do more than just install packages and config files. It can orchestrate your infrastructure. You can do crazy things like take machines out of a load balancer pool, upgrade it, verify that it's fine, and then put it back in an automated way. Just run a playbook. It reduces the possibility for a human to forget to put it back in the load balancer. Not saying that's ever happened, but by doing it with the playbook, it won't happen. Either things will go smoothly, or you'll get a big wall of red text to read through, which tells you exactly what went wrong. This is another new one, Ansible Tower, previously called Ansible AWX, which they renamed because people kept getting confused with AWS. It's basically a GUI for running Ansible playbooks. It's got support for multiple team members to go in. I think it's even got a graphical interface for building playbooks, but you can see what's currently being run against your infrastructure. If you trigger the provisioning from the interface, it will go off, run it all, give you a blow-by-blow update, and nicely show any errors or success messages right at the end. Now, Ansible wouldn't be anything if it wasn't for the modules, and there's a lot of modules. I first presented this talk at the beginning of October last year at PHP Northwest, and then there was 141 modules. Today I went and counted them again, not by hand, and there was 183. That's what, 42 modules since October? That's pretty good going. And those are just the ones that are in core. Those aren't the ones that other people have written either. Those are all fully documented on the site for you to use as soon as you install Ansible. Small selection. Every packaging manager you can think of under the sun, except Composer, which might have to be rectified soon. File, copy, template, lining file for file manipulation. And you can send notifications to your IRC channel, if any of you use HipChat, Campfire, anything like that. If every time a set of provisioning scripts is run, if every time a playbook runs you want to be notified, it can do that. Hooks into Nagios, PagerDuty, Pingdom. Every time you provision something, you can register it with your monitoring software. There's just hundreds, well, 184. But there's loads of modules out there available. Or write your own. You can even use PHP. I'm glad that came up earlier. Just because Ansible's Python doesn't mean that your modules have to be. I said that they take JSON in and read JSON out. There's also a compatibility layer which reads key value pairs for if you want to write modules in Bash. I'm not sure how data input is done using them, but definitely data output is just key equals val at the end of the script.
You have to make sure you've installed PHP as your first module before you start writing your other modules in it.
I also mentioned this a little bit earlier. There's a command line tool. Playbooks are definitely the way to go. You can check them into whatever version control software you're using, see diffs. But sometimes it's quite nice just to be able to run something on the command line to see what happens. And it's in this format. Ansible, host to run against, module name, args, and that's where the format comes from. So imagine that, oh no, there's a big vulnerability in the latest version in an old version of a certain kernel. Let's find out which of our servers run that kernel. Use the shell module and just run an arbitrary command, uname -r, and it will come back and tell you the kernel version for everything in your inventory file. You can do some more questionable things. How many of you use SE Linux? Oh, in which case, this is a terrible thing to do, never do it. This disables SE Linux on every server in your inventory file. It looks at the config file, looks for the regex, start of line SE Linux, and replaces it with SE Linux equals disabled. Yeah, in my last talk, there was a load of SE Linux users. They wanted to stone me before the talk had finished. Ansible has a couple of big wins. It uses SSH as its public key interface. There's no chef client, chef server, chef daemon. Same with Puppet, none of that. It just SSHs into the box and runs things. And you choose when to run it. The problem with these eventually consistent provisioning systems is you don't know when they're going to happen. They might run when you've just launched your latest marketing campaign and there's 10,000 people a minute trying to get on the site, and suddenly Chef says, I'm going to update the server now. Like, it's just not what you want. With Ansible, you have to tell it, go off, do this. But if you really do want that, I don't care when it runs, I just don't want to have to think about it. There is the Ansible pull module, project, sorry, not module. What this does is it clones your playbooks from whatever Git host you've got and runs them locally. This makes it infinitely scalable. For those of you that have used Puppet and Chef before, you might have noticed that once you get to a certain number of servers, it starts to struggle with all the requests coming in and say, okay, what do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now? With Ansible, everything's just cloned to disk and run locally. So, little caveat here, if your Git host can handle infinite clones, but other than that, it is infinitely scalable. Running it through Vagrant. Vagrant does have an Ansible provisioner, but like I said, I don't really like it because it captures all the output. If I'd have run it through the provisioner whilst putting the playbook together, we just would have typed Vagrant provision and then we would have sat and waited and then logged into the box to see. Whereas using the Ansible playbook command, you can see things as they happen. You can see when something hangs when it shouldn't. You can see if anything goes wrong instantly. And it's good experience because you might not be using Vagrant forever. You might want to run Ansible against AWS or a bare metal server somewhere. Knowing how to run the playbook command by hand. Any questions? I know we did a lot of questions earlier, but there must be one.
I might have missed this at the start, but how sort of mature is Ansible? Has it got like a couple of years of time?
Ansible's about 2 years old.
Right.
It's got company backing, Ansible the company.
Right.
Ansible Tower is a pay-for service, and they do lots of consulting around it as well. It's in the top 10 most watched Python projects on GitHub.
Right.
It's got about 500,000 users so far and 5,000 stores on GitHub.
So pretty stable.
It's pretty stable.
Cheers.
How do you specify like different versions of PHP or MySQL for your boxes?
The same way you would just by typing apt-get. It's just the package name, and it's all down to the repos that you use. Ansible doesn't do anything clever. It does what you tell it. If you say install the package named fooboy, it will go and look for the package named fooboy. If you say install fooboy-1.2, it'll look for that package name.
Is there overlap between things that Vagrant can set up for you, and things Ansible can set up for you, things like users and things. So you need a user before Ansible can connect, but would you ever use Ansible to deploy accepted public keys for...
Most definitely. So Vagrant can't actually do that. Vagrant gives you a box with the user called Vagrant, with the password Vagrant, and the predefined SSH key. Everything after that point is up to you. And that's where Ansible comes in. It can add all your users and SSH keys. Any more questions? Yep.
How do you determine at what point the sort of configuration you put on your box image sort of ends and your Ansible configuration starts? Is that just something you kind of decide yourself, or is there a natural sort of point?
The box should be empty.
So just a clean install?
Clean install, yeah. So it's worth mentioning actually, with Vagrant what you can do is you can boot up a machine, install everything that you want, and then repackage that as a box. So every time you type Vagrant up and it imports it, everything will be as you configured. That's actually slightly quicker because it doesn't have to go and install everything each time, but it's also a lot less flexible. Imagine that you upgrade from PHP 5.3 to 5.4. You then have to redistribute that Vagrant box to everyone. With Ansible, you change one playbook, and next time people run Vagrant up and Ansible playbook, they have 5.4. Like, they haven't had to do anything, they're just carrying on in their normal day-to-day job, and things are up to date with your latest changes.
Is there like a way, you know, in Public you have like hierarchy or something? It's like hierarchical config.
Yep.
So you have like, because you know you've got your vars at the top.
Yep.
You know, is there a way to have like global ones and then a way to sort of have a local config? So if you're working in the scene and everyone's got slightly different passwords or something?
Yes. So you can set config variables. I hope I don't miss any here. You can set them in the inventory file. That's the highest priority. You can set them at a role level. You can set them at an include level. So each role has variables which are overridden by variables passed when you include them, which are overridden by host level variables. I did miss one. There's also a variables file in each role. So it goes variables file, variables in the playbook, variables at include time, variables in your inventory file.
What's the include time thing, sorry?
So when you're applying multiple roles to one box, you include the roles, and when you include them, you can specify variables which will overwrite any that are defined at a lower level than that. Okay, in which case I've only got one question. How many of you that came in didn't know Vagrant and Ansible can see how it's useful now? That's what I was hoping for. You see how Vagrant isn't that useful unless you have something like Ansible on top of it. Because without Ansible it's just a box. With Ansible it's your entire development environment set up, deployed, ready to go. And fingers crossed, it did come back. So Apache isn't installed, couldn't connect to the site. Let's run it.
Why is it using any file for the inventory rather than YAML? Be consistent. Is that just another legacy thing?
Honestly, I have no idea.
Yeah, probably a bad question.
I don't like to question things.
I'm a big fan of YAML.
Ini files are simple.
It's true.
Like, they're really simple. Give it a header and a couple of lines and anyone can read them.
Yeah, YAML files feel a bit more like a script than a config sometimes.
I'll say that I really do like writing YAML files as playbooks. Like, you can write everything assuming that things work. When you're writing shell scripts to deploy your software, it's make sure that this path exists, make sure that path exists, make sure I have permission to write to this. With something like Ansible or Puppet or Chef, you just say, do this, and if it can, it will, and if it can't, it'll give you an error back. Almost there.
You can just include the script in your Vagrant file.
Say that again.
Include the Ansible file within your Vagrant file and just do it with Vagrant.
Yeah. But you don't get to see any of this.
But if you use the shell provisioner and you just execute that command from that provisioner, could you do it like that?
No, because this is something I didn't mention actually. Ansible runs on your local machine.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's the key difference, isn't it? Because with
Yeah.
Puppet, you SSH in and
then
Puppet apply.
yeah,
But this is actually SSH in from the
host.
Yeah.
Which means that Ansible doesn't even need installing on all your servers. You install Ansible locally, and it just SSHs into all the machines. You don't need to install anything. You can just use a base image with what's it called? SSHD enabled. Oh, it's done. And that was what, 2 minutes? And that's running on a 3-year-old MacBook Air in a virtual machine. And now I can Vagrant destroy, Vagrant up, run it again, and it's back to exactly how I expected it. It's quick, it's reproducible, and assuming that Vagrant's playing nicely, it always works. Thanks.